my name is Mike Pinion. I'm a member of the Bata Heritage Society. Our aim is to keep alive the memory of the British Bata Shoe Company at East Tilbury. The British Bata Shoe Company at East Tilbury started in 1932. It's basically a Czech business from Czechoslovakia and a worldwide business that set up its factory in East Tilbury in 1932. The main reason for them setting up the factory in East Tilbury was to gain a larger market worldwide because of Britain's connections to the British Empire. It felt that it could expand its own business, which it actually did, because it opened up factories in India, Pakistan, Africa, the Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, and numerous other countries around the world. At its peak, it had outlets in nearly 96 countries and factories in over 60 countries, and was producing countless millions of pairs of shoes a year, and also employing 100,000 people worldwide, with a massive, obviously, turnover. In East Tilbury, it employed over 3,000 people in the East Tilbury factory, but it also had a factory in Cumnock, just outside Glasgow, in Maryport, in Cumberland, and it had 400 shops, plus many small factories specialising in footwear scattered around the country, and employed probably close on 6,000 people in the UK.
What went wrong? Where did they lose their way along life's path?
In the UK, and primarily in the UK, they lost their souls probably in the middle 60s. Chisel-toe shoes, all different fashion shoes. So you couldn't make 50,000 pair of the same design, which the factory was primarily set up to produce. It was a high volume production factory. So if someone wanted 1,000 pair, it wasn't economical to set that up on a conveyor system. The costs on 1,000 pair, you needed to make 20, 30, 40, 50,000 pair to recover the costs. So the initial downside was fashion. The second downside was that Bata set up factories all around the world. And in some cases it was cheaper for East Tilbury to import shoes from India than it was to manufacture them. And you imported shoes from your own factory in India and then shut your factory in East Tilbury. The rubber factory was the first to go. And then there was a steady decline from the mid-80s onwards. The leather factory was slowly declined. Purely, a lot of the problem was fashion. People wanted smaller runs, and it just wasn't economically viable to make shoe runs, small runs, on the setup we had. They tried to introduce smaller setups, but it just never really worked. Unfortunately, the mentality wasn't there. They'd been running high volume production for so long that I don't think the change worked when they tried to make it. Yeah. Then the China syndrome caught up with us, which was labour costs. In 2005, our machinery and our order book was sold to a company in Malaysia. So the factory ceased production. In the terms of cost, China could produce, footwear is basically labour intensive. Labour in China is a fraction of the cost of labour in East Tilbury. So we were unable to compete. People were buying from China, and if you don't buy from China, people aren't going to buy your product, which is more expensive. Although quality is better, unfortunately we come to the era where people are looking at cost as much as quality. So if you can't sell the product, you can't carry on making it. You work on the same structure. So the build quality is the same, but the problem is you're too expensive. Because on a mass production, you need, like I said, between 30 and 50,000 pair to recover your setup costs. If you're only making 1,000 or 2,000 pairs, you can't recover your setup costs for volume production. Plus, with fashion, the last shape changes. People don't want the same look shoe. You go back to the 40s and 50s, you would have a basic man's work shoe, right? You might make it in different designs. You might make an Oxford, a brogue, a slip-on, elastic-sided, but it will be made on the same last. So the last, which is one of the biggest cost products for the production, was the same. The knife equipment would change, but not all the knife equipment, just some of it, so that you could cover the costs. But if you're making fashion, and you need a different last for every production, different cutting equipment for every production, the costs increase. Plus, again, like I said, shoemaking is labour intensive. So countries, Korea and other countries in Asia could produce the similar sort of shoe, but cheaper because their labour costs were cheaper. Even though you got the shipping costs, they were still cheaper. So there was a steady demise in orders and obviously a steady demise in the size of the factory. I joined Bata's in the mid-60s as an apprentice engineer and then progressed through to a maintenance technician, then to a production supervisor, then to eventually ending up as chief engineer and production manager.
What were your tasks?
Which ones? As an apprentice engineer, I was learning engineering. As a maintenance technician, my responsibility was repairing all the machinery and keeping it running. And as a production supervisor, was supervising production. Then as chief engineer and production manager, my responsibility was the engineering department and production of the whole plant. We weren't, it was a happy ship. We weren't overly, you had to have discipline, but you had to have discipline and everybody had to enjoy what they were doing and work well as a team.
What were your years of service?
Me, I worked there for 40 years.
Until what year?
2006. So the Bata organisation still exists today. It's still a large organisation. It's still got, I think, factories in about 20 odd countries, shops in the thousands, and they claim to serve 1 million customers a day.
So the legacy of the Bata brothers continues?
Yeah.
And doesn't look like it's going to end. They've survived a lot of storms, a lot of changes.
A lot of changes, yeah. Yeah, and I think they'll carry on. They're more retail than they are production now. Whereas it used to be production orientated and retail was a sideline. Now production, if you like, is a sideline. It's mostly retail.
Now, turning to that very interesting collection of newspapers, what's that all about?
This was a paper that was produced weekly by Bata's. It covers everything that's happening in the factory, everything that's happening in the community, telling you what's on in the cinema, what activities are going on. It tells you what the food's going to be in the canteen. It's adverts for the supermarket and various other adverts. And it's got all the sport news. Sport being a very important part of the Bata system. There was football teams, probably, I would say at that time in '65, there was probably 8 different football teams. There was cricket teams, netball, table tennis, snooker, darts, fencing, you name it, there was a sport. And people in the community were active in all these sports. So sport was a very important thing, so the news about the sport obviously was equally important.
Hold the front page. What's the news there?
This is the Bata Sports and Social Club's annual party for children of the Bata estate. It was one of the things that went on. You had children's parties, you had lots of other functions that were community orientated. There was a gala day once a year. As I said, there was football matches against West Ham once a year. All the top players from West Ham over the years came. Martin Peters, Jeff Hurst, Bobby Moore, Harry Redknapp, all came to East Tilbury to play football and to visit the factory.
It must have been wonderful in 1966 then.
That's the one year they didn't come. They didn't come in '66 because of the World Cup, but they were all there in '67.
This is a lifestyle. This must have been amazing. There must have been so many marriages and between staff that everyone must have been related after a few years.
It wasn't that bad, but yeah, there was a lot of intermarriages. But you have to remember that 3,000 people worked there, only 400 of them lived on the estate. The people living on the estate often tended to be key workers that were needed in the factories at short notice. The factory also had its own fire brigade. Because it had the factory site and 650 acres of land around the factory, 400 of acres which was farmland, arable and dairy cattle, there was a lot of property to protect. So they had their own fire brigade. But that again was a tradition with the company in Czechoslovakia that had its own fire brigade from the early 1900s. Played football, cricket, tennis, badminton, Yeah, I was very active in sport.
Did you need to join anything outside the world of Bata? It had it all, didn't it?
As a child, as a small child, which I was basically born on the estate, both my parents worked in the factory. As a small child, people were jealous of anybody who lived in East Tilbury because we had the swimming pool, the cinema, tennis courts, the playing fields, big children's playgrounds that other people in the area didn't have. So, yeah, we were lucky. You didn't really have to leave the estate to do things. We weren't far from the River Thames, we weren't far from Coalhouse Fort. There was fields all around us. Used to build forts out of bales of hay, much to the farmers' annoyance. And he often used to chase us across the fields in his car. But, it was a good place to live and to be brought up.
What can you tell me about the Bata Record? As a journalist, I've looked at it. It's 8 pages packed full of everything that you could possibly want in it. Sports,
It's got news
get-togethers.
News about the company. It's got news about the factory, about what's happening in the factory, what businesses changes are going to be made, who's visiting, what factory shows are going on, personal things about people. Like here, 2 engineers celebrate probably doing 25 years. You've got the cinema, what's on at the cinema, what's on around, all the different functions that were going on. What else have we got? Personal paths where people can send in little snippets of information about what's happening.
Do you think they should have renamed it Cradle to the Grave? Did they have their own church and burial yard?
No. The local church was East Tilbury Village, but no, they didn't have their own church. They had most everything else you needed, but not a church.
How much did it cost?
The Bata Record was 1 pence, 1 old penny. And it was 1 old penny from 1934 until it ceased being sold in 1972. It was always 1 penny. It was always 1 penny.
This is a phenomenal publication. Every week, every Friday it would come out,
Yes.
and Bata people would look at their salaries and part with a penny and take it home and to the husband or to the wife, and it would sit there and you'd flick through it. How many staff did they have producing it? 8 pages. I mean, they must have had at least 3 or 4 reporters.
I know that the main journalist and the editor was Mr. James, and I know he was previously employed in Fleet Street. Quite how many other, I know there was a professional photographer, but how many other people were employed as assistants, I'm not really sure. Key people would contribute information. Like there's one here, there's a wedding. So people would contribute the photographs and the information about the wedding themselves. They also had a company photographer. If there was, like here, we've got wedding presents from the company and friends. So the photographer would go around when the company presented their presents to the people and their friends presented the presents to the people. The photographer would go around and take the photographs. Now, obviously, the senior management would also contribute to what was going to happen in the company, and whoever run football teams used to write up their own write-ups and contribute those, and along with photographs. It was a number of people contributed towards it, but it was all eventually laid out and prepared by the editor. Because it was a sold publication, every copy every week had to be sent to the British Museum, where it was digitised, and originally it was microfilmed and then eventually digitised and put on their records. So from 1934 to 1972 they have a copy of every paper that was produced. Initially, I used to sell the Bata Record as a 15-year-old in the factory, and you would be given about 200 Bata Records to go and stand in a key place and sell them at a penny a time. And for that, you would get 1 farthing for every paper you sold, which at 25% wasn't a bad turnover, really. It was easy money. You'd be an hour on a Friday, and you sold 200 Bata Records, a farthing each one. You'd come away with 10 bob. 10 old shillings, obviously. People would come out of the factories and make a beeline if they wanted a Bata Record. They'd all have their pennies ready and you'd slip them off, give them the money, stick the money in your pocket. Didn't have to shout. They all wanted to know what was going on.
I'm Graham Sutcliffe. I used to work at the Bata Shoe Company. I was an apprentice engineer and I was there for 20 years. I worked from 1968 to about 88.
So you left before the bitter end?
I left before the bitter end. I saw the writing on the wall and left.
Still very fond of Bata?
Yes, it was a good place. I had my parents work there and Dad was an electrician and my mother, for a better word, the job that she did was a skiver, which is reducing leather material to a thinner to stitch it together.
Now let's recap on that. There's a word there you've said called
Skiver.
skiving.
Skiving.
And how does it have any? Does it have any link to the present sense of skiving?
No, none whatsoever.
There's no way.
It's a reduce of a material, so you reduce the two edges, so instead of being fat like that, it's thinner, so you can stitch it. So you skive the edge.
And bears no relationship to skiving.
Skiving off work, no. That's what.
Because a lot of people must ask that.
Yeah,
Your mum
that's
was
it.
a skiver.
My mum, when people used to say, "What did you do?" and she'd say, "I'm a skiver," and people used to laugh. And she said to me, "Dad, why does people laugh when I tell them I'm a skiver?" And he said, "Don't you realise that what the word skiver means, besides barters of reducing material, can mean a person who's not interested in doing work?" Well, this page is from March 1943, when the Bata Record was taken in-house at East Tilbury and was produced the first time. And it's a story of the setting up of the type, making the pages and printing. And from there, it's a lot of the chaps came from the printing industry in London, came down and they had a manager for setting out the type, someone who checked it. The stories had to go in and then they was pressed and the paper came out at the end of on a Friday and issued for a penny of paper. Stories in there was variable, and this one, because it's 43, is quite a lot of war stories.
Surely they were the subject of censorship. How did they get away with it?
There was a lot of censorship, but some of the stories that was here was of a person that would write back to home to say he was somewhere. Now, maybe some of these did slip through, that we realised that this chap who was on the HMS something was in port in Gibraltar. Now that may have slipped through and not been censored. I don't know. But because of the information came very slowly from the front, and by the time it got into the paper, the ship possibly would have been gone by then anyway. And this chap is still alive today. He's our longest service member of the Bata estate. His name is Ken Stanley. He was a keen footballer and still is, if he could think. This is Ken Stanley, presented attached to the Army, hopes to return to the RAF to complete his aircrew training in the near future. He is anxious to get cracking and see what Berlin looks like from the air. He writes, "I have not met a Bata man on active service for some 6 months until yesterday. And it happened like this. I was sitting in the mess room, taking no notice of anyone or anything except my dinner, when an RAF man came and sat beside me. He looked up and we both stared at each other and recognised each other simultaneously. It was Jack Haxel, another member of the Bata organisation. He is also attached to the Army and had come to our place on a one-day job. I hope to see my friends at East Tilbury soon." And that was from Ken Stanley, wrote to the Bata Record at that time, 1943.
And Ken is still alive?
He's still alive. He's in his late 90s, sorry, and he's still alive, and he joins us for our open days once or twice a year.
He obviously knows about that article.
Yes, he knows about all the articles, and he's given some of his memoirs and that online. And there's many of the story of the Bata's people. A lot survived and a lot died. On our war memorial, In East Tilbury we have, I think we've got 80 odd people. We've just updated that memorial and rededication to it after we found some new stories. And one of the new stories that we found was this lady, one of the only ladies that are on the memorial, and she was killed. She was among those killed when a bomb fell on a cinema in South East Town recently. Miss Ivy Merrill Savage, 34, manageress of the Bata shoe store in the town. Now, she wasn't the manageress, her husband was, but he had to go to war. So she took over the manager's job at the store, went out that night to the cinema and lost her life. So she was technically working for Bata's at that time in the shoe shop, and she's remembered on our war memorial too. And one of the few women that are on there. And a sad story. And her husband, I believe her husband survived, because he came home to find out this story.
So he went to war.
He went to war.
And survived, and she didn't go to war.
She didn't go to war. She took over the shop and lost her life in a cinema watching the film.
So all human life is here, as they say.
Yes, yes.
This is like a city within a city, a state within a state. Everything. It's a mini England, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, and this is my uncle. This story, and this is from April 1943, and it's quite prominent. This one is my uncle, who was in the RAF. He left East Tilbury. He was a bookkeeper in the former leather factory, and he went off to be stationed in Rhodesia. And little did he know, behold, when he got there, his eldest brother was on the aerodrome as a trainer. And his elder brother has been in Rhodesia for a considerable time and looks upon his younger brother training to be a fighter pilot. Frost Minor, which is William Frost, his latest letter, which accompanied the photograph, so it goes on to say he was always looked upon as a speed mad. The high speed of the fighter planes just suit his speed craving, and it is most exciting. The heat he finds most oppressive, and often at lectures class, half the class fall asleep, but they make up for it later because they are all eager to qualify for their wings. And it goes on. The prominent bit, he passed out, he got his wings, and then he joined the fighters and went around Algeria, and then he ended up in Italy. And before Christmas of 1944, he was supposed to be on a bombing run over the marshalling yards in Trieste. And he went up, and it was low cloud that night, Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve it was, sorry. And it got squashed. It was too much, ground cover was too bad. So they returned to base, went up next day, New Year's Day, and did the same run over there, got shot down, landed, crashed, and it was such an intense crash, which was loaded with the bombs. The plane was destroyed, the people, no one got out, and he is buried with his flight engineer, a navigator, in Padua Cemetery, one of the only twin graves together, because it was indistinguishable who was who, but they're buried together in Padua, and our whole family's been there.